Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang, currently sheltering in place in San Francisco. SpaceX's historic launch called off 17 minutes before liftoff due to bad weather. The next launch attempt has been set for Saturday. If successful, this will be the first time SpaceX has ever successfully sent humans into space. We're going to speak to a space investor later in the show about what it all means whenever it happens. Meantime, markets ending the day in the green. Investors seemingly optimistic that the worst of the economic distress has peaked. This as states continue to reopen across the country. Meantime, speaking of reopening, Disney presenting its plans to reopen Disney World in Florida on July 11th. We spoke with Disney CEO Bob Chapek, and we'll bring you highlights from that later this hour. But first, speaking of the broader markets, Disney shares, by the way, ending the day slightly up. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, who's been watching all the moves today, up and down. Abigail, give us the lowdown. What happened today?
Well, it was another interesting day. This year has been all about volatility, Emily, because, of course, earlier this year we had that huge plunge. Then out of the March lows, we have the big rebound rally. Investors are now uncertain as to what's next. So we're seeing lots of choppiness on the day. That was true today. Earlier, at one point, we had the NASDAQ 100 down more than 1%, the Fang Index down about 4%. But on the close, we are largely looking at green, but with some notable divergences. So take a look at the S&P 500, the Dow Jones Transportation Average, which we wouldn't usually look at on this show, but we are seeing a sector rotation into some of the beaten down areas out of, take a look at that Fang Index, even though it's off the lows, a down day, down about 0.6%. And also on the rising tensions with China around Hong Kong, we have a China index down about 1.2%. So again, interesting divergences on the day. All of this, Emily, does speak to the volatility I was just mentioning. And if we take a look at the VIX for the NASDAQ 100, we will see it's relatively elevated, closing right below that 30 level, that key 30 level, but nonetheless higher than the S&P 500's VIX, suggesting that some investors are bracing for more of a sector rotation out of technology.
Break down the sector rotation for us a bit more, though. Is this sustainable?
That's the trillion-dollar question, Emily, because, of course, out of those March lows, it has been all about the stay-at-home stocks, the FANG stocks, the technology stocks, the biotech stocks, and left for the more recently for buyers, the cyclical stocks, such as the banks and the industrials. So when we take a look at this year-to-date chart, the FANG stocks up nearly 25%. The banks deeply in the red, still in a bear market. Over the last couple of days, it's been a big reversal. It's unclear whether it is sustainable. Some investors worry about that, wonder about that. It would be healthy, though, to see those cyclical sectors really catch up and move up, because it suggests that investors are optimistic about the economy and reopening. However, there's an important sentiment piece to that, Emily, because of course those big stay-at-home stocks and mega caps, those are some of the most beloved stocks out there. I'm talking about Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Nvidia. You can see here over the last 2 months, huge gains. So if all of a sudden we were to see the money continuing to go into the banks, into the industrials, relatively well-known names, but perhaps less sexy, if you will, than some of these technology names, it could be a little bit of a problem for sentiment, an adjustment, if you will, Emily.
So let's talk about another Elon Musk company that's not SpaceX, and that is Tesla. Shares up more than 90% this year, despite production issues at the factory because of the shutdown in the middle of the pandemic. Why are investors so excited about this?
It's pretty incredible, Emily, because this stock really on a roller coaster this year, but as you mentioned, up about 90% at this point, really climbing right out of that trough, out of the March lows. I have to believe that behind it is optimism around the electric vehicles that we've always had. Of course, the Elon Musk factor, given some of the very interesting tweets he's put out more recently, but very pro-reopening. And take a look at those gains relative to the fact that overnight they actually talked about having to cut pricing on some of their models by $5,000 on both the Model S and the Model X, and $2,000 on the Model 3. But even with that, again, Tesla just outperforming even the New York Stock Fang Index, which it is a part of, speaking to, again, the degree of, I would almost say, euphoria over Elon Musk and what he's potentially going to do with this company. But the question there, similar to the sector rotation, is whether or not it can last.
Well, we know that Tesla investors are always very passionate about the stock. Okay, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for breaking it down. Meantime, as we've been speaking, headlines coming out of Boeing. Boeing now resuming its 737 MAX production. Of course, this is a troubled plane that had a couple of deadly and devastating crashes. Boeing has been working on new safety implementations and will begin production again at their factory in Renton, Washington. Shares up slightly after hours, and also interesting given that Boeing is the other company, in addition to SpaceX, that has gotten funding from NASA for space shuttle missions. We'll continue to follow the story and bring you any more headlines as they continue to roll out. Meantime, speaking of reopening, Disney laying out its plans to reopen Disney World in Florida on July 11th. Epcot Center will follow on July 15th. I spoke with Disney CEO Bob Chapek earlier today. Take a listen.
We always said we would not open up again until we thought we could do so responsibly. We've got some learnings from Shanghai. We've got some learnings from our own Disney Springs retail and dining area that we opened up just a week ago. And we've been able to make some learnings in terms of how you keep that social distancing. That is the key for us, keeping that 6 feet social distancing, no matter whether people in restaurants, whether on Main Street, or whether they're in attractions. And we're confident that we can do that and open up responsibly.
That said, Universal is planning to open up June 5th. Why a month later?
Well, for us, we feel that this is the right time for us in July. We've got a different situation, frankly, than Universal does because we're much bigger. We have a much more complex business. We've got a different labor situation. And at the same time, we're also going to be implementing a new reservation system for our guests. And it's going to take some time to take the millions of reservations that we've already got on the books and then switch that over to a new reservation system. So we think July is the right time for us.
Let's talk about some of your learnings from Shanghai. You've been open there since May 11th. You've been doing these temperature checks. Are people actually showing up with fevers and getting turned away? Have you gotten to that 30% capacity yet? And when do you plan to go beyond that?
Well, everything has gone extremely well at Shanghai, and I must compliment not only our cast, but I must compliment the guests for their cooperation during the whole thing, because it really takes the chemistry between both groups in order to make this whole thing work with social distancing. And, so for us, the learning is that we've stuck to our limitations that we've placed on ourselves, and it's worked extremely well. We're up to about 20,000 guests now that we take per day. And we're maintaining the social distancing guidelines that the government has placed upon us. And we believe that as those social distancing guidelines are relaxed or somehow changed, that we'll be able to actually grow with it and really please even more guests than we can today.
A sense of which resorts will be next and when. I know you've gotten the green light to open downtown Disney in California. What about Hong Kong, Tokyo, Paris, and Disneyland itself?
Well, we've got no announcement that we're ready to make on those other parks. As you know, they all are in areas with different situations in terms of the progress of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also different situations in terms of where the government sort of feels they're at and providing some level of assurances that it's going to be responsible to open up. So we have to take our cues from each local government in each place. We always like to say at Disney that we're really just a citizen of the environments that we are operating in, and we want to be a good citizen. And so we really do follow the lead of the local governments as our cue, and then we overlay what we believe is good common sense from a Disney standpoint, and that determines our opening date.
Disney CEO Bob Chapek there. Coming up, Disney's vast library of content has been the envy of many streaming competitors. We're going to talk about the new content kid on the block, and that is HBO Max. Coming up next. This is Bloomberg. And Another contender entering the streaming race. AT&T's Warner Media launched HBO Max today with a last-minute deal to distribute the service to Comcast users and also snapping up an old NBC favorite, Friends. Joining us now to discuss how HBO Max is positioned in a crowded market is Lightshed partner Rich Greenfield. Rich, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have strong feelings about this topic, but how well positioned do you think HBO Max is in a market that is already quite busy?
Well, I think what people forget is that there are 32, 33 million existing subscribers to HBO. So whereas a Disney Plus was starting from 0 when it launched, and it had an amazing first day, 10 million, and it skyrocketed up to 50. The reality is HBO is starting with a base of 32 million plus subscribers. And the question is, HBO has been in and around the 30 million level for years. I mean, literally for years. And I think the question they're focused on is, well, how do you take this thing from 30 million subs and grow it to 50, 60, 70 million plus subscribers in the U.S., not to mention expanding around the world? And I think you have to do that by making it broader. I mean, HBO was a very kind of intellectually highbrow, premium comedy and drama. It wasn't a place where you had kids' content or realities or rom-coms. I mean, when you look at the diverse content from catalog TV shows like Friends and Big Bang, Ren and Stimpy, Rick and Morty, you have a really diverse array of content now that I think is going to attract more subscribers, but also give existing subscribers far more to do. And I think the key that everyone forgets, you're not paying anything more than what you were paying for HBO before. I mean, it's the same $15. You're just getting a heck of a lot more than you were before.
Right, but that 30 million subscribers certainly doesn't compare to what Disney Plus has now after less than a year of existence, and far less than what Netflix has. So how do you compare HBO Max to now the folks that are already in this market? Of course, there's Netflix and Disney Plus, which has been doing quite well.
Well, just remember, Disney Plus, you're talking global numbers versus just U.S. numbers, and so the HBO number is still a very large domestic-only number when you're talking about the HBO base. And this is a service in HBO that is far broader than Disney. I mean, Disney, they're ramping their originals over time, but most of it is a relatively young, skewing service, which is why it's priced so low, at $5.99 or $6.99, with a lot of people taking it for less. This is really a four quadrant. I mean, HBO is trying for all forms of content. It's a very big bet. It's clearly, if you look at what John Stankey's been saying about AT&T, this is their future. I mean, it's not DirecTV. It's not linear cable networks. Like HBO Max is their future, I don't want to say weapon, but sort of like that's the engine of growth. And I think the reason you know that is they went out and they hired Jason Kilar from Hulu, who basically built Hulu into what it became, today. You go out and you get someone like that, an outsider, to come in to build. I think it's because you have a very bold vision for what you are. And I know it's fun. Everyone loves talking about streaming wars. I mean, every place you hear streaming wars, this and this entrant and that entrant. It's far less about Netflix versus HBO versus Disney versus Amazon Prime. All of these services are taking tremendous time and attention away from linear TV. That is the real focus is, remember, there are 80 million people still spending upwards of $100 a month for linear TV. Not only is there no sports on right now, and sports will come back, but if you're not a sports fan, all the best content isn't in the bundle. All the best content you can get a la carte through all these streaming services. You don't need to have a bundle, and I think that's why we saw record cord cutting in Q1. Over 2 million people cut the cord. And I think you're going to see 8 to 10 million for the full year, especially given the after effects of COVID in terms of the economy, whatever recessionary impacts. I mean, so many people out of jobs. Like, I think it's just you're going to see an all-time record cord cutting. And so there's going to be a lot of dollars to redeploy because it's a lot cheaper to sign up for HBO Max and Netflix than it is to have a cable subscription.
So let's talk about the content pipeline then, because that affects all of these competitors, streaming and, of course, linear television. Even Disney hasn't restarted film and TV production. Of course, it seems like the country is starting to reopen, but there could be a second wave. We don't know how long we're going to be in this situation. How does that impact, HBO Max and everyone else, especially with this new service, though, just getting off the ground?
Look, this is an issue for everyone. I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball, Emily, and I could tell you like how you do traditional film and TV production. You're not going to be able to have lots of extras. I mean, thank God Game of Thrones finished its run, because I actually don't know how you would film a new season of Game of Thrones when you think about shooting in multiple countries, massive casts, lots of extras. Like the whole challenges of shooting things like that. We're going into a new normal. I don't know how you do that. Obviously, things that are on sound stages that are relatively small group productions are easy. Reality TV like The Bachelor, like I have no idea how you're going to do things like that in this new world with social distancing and, the intimacy issues are all of these things are going to be real challenges for starting production. But I'm going to go back to your question is basically with these services just launching, how is it going to affect them? The good news for someone like HBO Max and more importantly, the broader Warner Brothers, which fuels it, there is a massive, massive library. So, you put 290 episodes of Big Bang out there today, 260 episodes of Friends. I mean, there is a lot of library content, and they are only giving you a sneak peek today of what's available. You're going to see more and more library content roll in the weeks and months ahead. And so, look, when production restarts, it's going to help all of these services. But I do think that the library is going to be a big advantage. A lot of this library content, I mean, something like Big Bang has never been available commercial-free before. I mean, it was available on TBS late at night, and you could watch it with commercials. This is the first time you can basically binge I think it's 12 seasons of Big Bang. You can binge it all now. And so the library is going to be a big asset. And you even see companies like Apple now going out and looking and hunting for some library content. I think, you had Lucas Shaw write about that on Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was last week, that, everyone is looking to bulk up on library now. And I think that really advantages what Warner Media is trying to do with HBO Max.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the other streaming competitors, because we've been talking about consolidation, and actually I believe now, Rich, that we're going to have to move on because we've run out of time and we got to get to some breaking news. Rich, thank you so much for your thoughts. Always good to have you here on the show. We'll continue this conversation off air, as I know how much we both love to talk about this rich green field of LightShed. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, we're getting some headlines in out of the House. The House now has enough votes to pass a bill on sanctions regarding the new security law in Hong Kong that has been drafted by the Chinese central government that has been so controversial and ignited new protests in Hong Kong. This would send this bill to the president's desk. We're going to continue to follow that story. Meantime, SpaceX, as we mentioned, canceling that planned launch, moving it to Saturday due to bad weather. We're going to have more on that coming up. And we're going to be talking quickly about Instagram giving more autonomy to its creators. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Instagram will now yet let creators profit directly from their videos, helping popular users generate more income in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and moving the service into stiffer competition with YouTube. Joining us now to discuss, who else but Bloomberg's Sarah Frier. So Sarah, talk to us about the new guidelines here.
Basically, somebody on Instagram will, for the first time, have the ability to make money off of their audience directly from Instagram. They are going to have this tipping feature on live videos. Live video views have been up 70% since the start of the pandemic shutdown. And what they're going to be able to do is your audience can give you 99 cents or $2.99 or $4.99, little tips that will help compensate people who have been doing live fitness tutorials or live cooking tutorials or live performances. And then there's also the IGTV videos. IGTV is essentially Instagram's YouTube competitor, but they haven't really made it enticing to create good videos there because there is no compensation the way YouTube has. So now what they're going to do is share 55% of the ad revenue on IGTV with creators, and that's going to happen once you click through to watch the rest of the video after you've seen a preview on your Instagram feed. So this is a really big step for Instagram. It'll help them get more revenue over time from these efforts, but it will also help this whole influencer industry, which has really been hurt by the COVID-19 pandemic, in trying to monetize their audiences.
What does this mean for YouTube, which is obviously where most of the video creating is happening, and you've had creators making money there for a very long time?
I mean, it's certainly going to be competition for them. Instagram TV never really took off as a YouTube replacement. I think maybe the bigger threat to YouTube has been TikTok. But I think that a lot of creators in the past have felt pressure to also have a YouTube presence in addition to their Instagram presence. They thought, well, Instagram is where I have my brand deals, but I need to diversify my income source, so I might as well have a YouTube channel as well. I might as well have a Patreon. Maybe I have, just a way to ask people for money through a podcast. But this is now going to make it less necessary for the people who become big on Instagram to have a YouTube presence.
So let's talk a little bit about the TikTok threat, which has been rising, people calling it the pandemic winner in social media over the last 3 months, not Instagram, not YouTube. Just how much more powerful do you think TikTok can become, and could it really significantly dent the mind share of Instagram?
I think TikTok is becoming incredibly powerful because it's escapist entertainment. It's comedy, it's dancing, it's feel-good pet videos. I think that it's this phenomenon right now. I think the tough thing for TikTok will be making sure that has some longevity beyond this moment. They have been starting to do TV deals for their creators. They're trying to do other ways of taking advantage of that ecosystem. But already you're seeing a lot of TikTok stars migrate over to YouTube and Instagram as well, so that they're not as dependent on just one platform. So I think it's becoming a more crowded space. You're not just a TikTok star anymore. You're just a social media star.
All right, Bloomberg Sarah Friar, of course, the Instagram versus TikTok story will continue to follow. Thank you so much. Coming up, Mother Nature steps in. A historic SpaceX launch has been scrubbed, moved to this weekend. We're going to talk to a space investor next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Well, today was supposed to be the day that NASA started sending astronauts back into space from U.S. soil, but Mother Nature had other plans. Bad weather scrapped the liftoff for the SpaceX Crew Dragon Demo 2. It has been pushed now to Saturday. Astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley will have to wait until then to hopefully make history. Joining us now, Chad Anderson, managing partner of Space Capital, which invests across the space industry. Chad, good to have you back here on the show. So what does this cancellation, or delay, I should say, actually mean? It's just a blip, no serious issues here, right?
Yeah, it looks like everything technically went fine. They got up to 14 minutes, I think, T-minus 14 minutes. So it was really the weather that held them back. And you can't do anything to control the weather. So everything checked out. They fueled the spacecraft, and now they are taking it down, and they're going to try it again on Saturday, and then there's another window on Sunday.
We're actually standing by now for the astronauts to disembark. They have to do several things before they can actually exit the spacecraft. So we are waiting for them to come out. Of course, there were a lot of spectators there. The president, his family, President Trump, just saying he looks forward to being with NASA and SpaceX on Saturday, assuming the launch does happen as now planned. this weekend. Talk to us about what this means for the industry. Obviously, it's been 9 years since NASA sent an astronaut into space from U.S. soil. This will be the first time a private company is doing so and the first launch of its kind for SpaceX.
Exactly. I mean, this is a big deal. This is a big deal because it represents really the future of human spaceflight for NASA, for SpaceX, and the broader commercial industry. This Falcon 9 and the Dragon capsule that sits on top of it is one of the most advanced spacecrafts ever built. And it's also one of the safest. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of firsts. The first US launch since 2011, the first new spacecraft since 1981, the first privately built crewed spacecraft to take humans to orbit. And it's the first time, obviously, in SpaceX's 18-year history that they're going to be launching humans. And importantly, this is going to give us an alternative ride to space. Currently, you can only go with the Russians on the Soyuz rocket, and NASA's paying upwards of, the last price they paid was $90 million for a seat. SpaceX can offer that same thing for something more like $55 million, so almost half the price.
Obviously, it's a whole new economy of space travel and also potentially a future of space tourism. You know, it may not be as expensive for NASA, but it's still incredibly expensive for us regular human beings. I mean, does this open a new era of potentially space tourism, or is it going to be, for most of us, out of reach?
Without a doubt. I mean, SpaceX has ushered in this space renaissance that we've seen over the last 10 years, where they've lowered the price and also published their pricing. So for the first time, it's made space accessible to the rest of us. And they're doing the same thing now with human spaceflight as well. The thing is that with lower costs, you get more access and more participation. And with that, you get more competition. And competition is good because it leads to more innovation. And we've seen that play out over the last 10 years. And so it bodes very well for all of us who have had an interest in space and have wanted to go ourselves, for those of us who want to participate and start new companies to take advantage of this increased access, and also for those investors who are looking to get involved. There's now room and a very clear path for all of us to participate in this new entrepreneurial space age.
So let's talk about the competition. Obviously, Boeing has also gotten funding for NASA to do shuttle missions. Then, of course, there's Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic and a lot of companies not named SpaceX that are working on this. Talk about the competitive landscape and, you know, how much of a chance these other companies have of catching up to where SpaceX is today.
Yeah, so with this commercial crew program, it's undoubtedly been a success. They were hoping to get to space in 2017, and they're obviously a little bit delayed, but not by much, especially in space terms. And when it comes to the commercial crew program, it was Boeing and SpaceX that got the contracts. Boeing was meant to be the safe bet here, and SpaceX, back when they gave these first contracts 15 years ago, was really an up-and-comer, not a lot of track record to speak of. And so they were, you know, hey, if SpaceX can do this, you know, then it's a great way for us to save some money, but let's also do a contract with Boeing because they're more likely to get us to space. You know, fast forward 15 years, SpaceX is on the pad. They did a full wet rehearsal today, and they're going to try again this weekend. Boeing has failed to get to the space station in their Demo 1 mission, and that set them back, I think, a year behind SpaceX. So it just goes to show, you know, it's not just the lower cost, but it's also the innovation, the iteration, and the vast number of tests that they do that's allowing SpaceX to really advance what we're doing in the space industry.
All right, Chad Anderson of Space Capital will be watching with you on Saturday, assuming it all goes to plan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Meantime, biotech companies have been persistent in their coronavirus vaccine trials. After Novavax started its testing on people, the company saw an 18% jump in shares. We spoke earlier with CEO Stan Erck about the timeline for the vaccine to be available to a broader audience.
like the other vaccine manufacturers, we are all going as fast as we possibly can, and this is as the U.S. government set up a warp speed program. We're using warp speed. If we go into, as I say, our expectation is we'll go into a phase 2 trial, but the phase 2 trial will be designed to be a phase 2/3, so that you can actually see efficacy. And the expectation is that we'll do it in multiple countries. We'll do it in Australia, U.S., and likely in a couple other countries in August. And by somewhere in the October-November timeframe, we would expect to be able to see efficacy. And that could lead governments, the FDA and EMA in Europe, to conclude that the vaccine might be deployable, at least under emergency use authorizations. If that's the case, then by the end of the year, vaccine should be start being distributed, at least to the frontline healthcare workers, and then on down toward people at most risk. So that would be the fastest timeline.
Stan, you're using a protein approach as opposed to some of the other manufacturers or researchers like Merck and J&J that are using other approaches. What's the advantage of the protein approach?
Well, so it's an approach that's been proven for some time. This is not our first coronavirus vaccine. It's actually our third. We made a vaccine against SARS and one against Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, and we showed that the simple it's the production of a protein that's found on the surface of a pathogen, such as coronavirus or flu or Ebola, and our production system is the same for all of these vaccines, and it's been shown to be effective at preventing disease. When you take in an animal model, you take and protect the animal and then challenge it with the actual virus and show protection. And as I say, in Ebola, for instance, we did 5 or 6 non-human primate challenge models and showed that very low doses, you can have 100% protection. And the advantage of that is that you can get very low doses so that you can make large quantities, and we're talking now billions of doses in a manufacturing facility. And we just announced, probably an hour or two ago, you may not have seen it, but the acquisition of a manufacturing facility in the Czech Republic that is being finished up this summer, that has the capacity to produce over 1 billion doses of vaccine. So our protein-based platform allows us to make lots of vaccine that's been shown to be safe in a half dozen different virus disease models.
Yes.
And
this was a $170 million acquisition of Praha vaccines. Manufacturing is a sticking point for a lot of companies that do hope to have a vaccine. Stan, what happens if you're not first to market? Is this acquisition then a mistake? Are you then in trouble, for the future, for other research?
No. In fact, actually, not at all. First of all, there's not going to be one coronavirus vaccine. There's no one company that has the scalability to make enough vaccine that's required. So there's going to be multiple, of the multiple approaches, there's going to be a few vaccines that are deployed globally. So it's needed, and even if we're not first, everybody has to be safe in a vaccine because you're giving vaccines to healthy people. So it has to be safe first. Secondly, you have to show that it's effective, and there'll be different levels of efficacy. But third, it has to be scalable, and ours is scalable, and now we have the physical capacity to make it scalable into the billions of doses. So
Stan Erck there, the CEO of Novavax. Coming up, how do Chinese and American investors feel about pouring money into cross-border startups in the midst of rising tensions? We'll talk to an investor next. This is Bloomberg. U.S.-China tensions continuing to escalate, with the Chinese government issuing a new draft security law for Hong Kong. Meantime, the White House indicating with Hong Kong's autonomy in jeopardy, that also means the city's special trade status also in jeopardy. For more on this and how it will impact cross-border trade and other issues, we're joined now by Edith Young, a general partner at Race Capital. Edith, thank you so much for joining us. I know that this is personal for you. You were born and raised in Hong Kong. Your parents are still there. What's your take on the current situation?
The current situation is really tough and very sad to watch. For the past few days, there are so many riot police cars, water cannon all over central Wan Chai and Admiralty area. Most of the protesters try to basically surround Hong Kong Legislative Council because they're really upset at what happened last week. And what's going on, if you think about it, if U.S. put any sanction against Hong Kong, it's not going to be good for both sides. And right now, my understanding is about 1,300 U.S. firms doing business in Hong Kong. And in 2008, there's about $66 billion trade between Hong Kong and U.S. And what's going on now, the tough part is that no matter how much like the young people protest today or tomorrow, it's really Beijing that called the shots. It's not really Hong Kong government. And I think what happened last week what happened last week is really the law passed for the standing committee to work out the actual security legislation, but the detail is actually not out yet. And the fact that the standing committee meet every 2 months, so we really wouldn't see any details until probably earliest some late summer, maybe August. So it's too early to say what will be the impact, but I think everyone in Hong Kong is super upset.
The U.S. House has now enough votes to pass this sanctions law and take it to the president's desk. Meantime, you've got the White House press secretary saying that the president is displeased with China's efforts here and that it's hard to see, quote unquote, how Hong Kong can remain a financial hub if China takes over. What do you think the implications are then for trade between the U.S. and China, and specifically this special status that Hong Kong enjoys?
Well, I think in general, like this whole situation is putting Hong Kong in a really tough place. And for particular focus on trade, right, from a Chinese point of view, in particular, someone who's like from Hong Kong originally, obviously we don't want to see this happen to Hong Kong. But at the same time, if any sanction happens to Hong Kong, it's going to really challenge the fact that we've been a financial center and hub of Asia. But if I'm coming from a China point of view, or let's say from a U.S. point of view, obviously U.S. wanted to do the U.S. way. And of course, for protecting democracy, I get that. But in many ways, looking at what's been happening between China and U.S. trade war for the last 12 months, CB has actually been targeting and blocking all China and U.S. deal and investment, no matter what. So anything that has smelled like security, national security reasons related to data, healthcare, bio, computing, AI, CB has already blocked it. And from a China point of view or from a Hong Kong point of view, if China is going to continue to have a hard time doing any business in the U.S., just look at what happened to TikTok. It's getting so much scrutiny. Or even last week, it seems like there's going to be more and more restrictions against Chinese companies getting listed in the U.S. stock market. It's going to be a huge impact. I think this unfriendliness culture will continue to grow, and it's going to be there for a long time. And the tough part is that Beijing made an announcement, but there's really no detail yet. And I completely understand why Hong Kong people are very upset. But the situation is really, really tough. And it's just sad to see that politics is impacting technology and investment so much.
So let's take a look at a company like TikTok as an example. I mean, how do you think this could have an potentially unintended consequences for a company like TikTok?
Well, I think just to start with, right, is company, not that many Chinese companies really like grow that big in the U.S. It's really, really rare to see. As we're seeing more and more Chinese companies want to go global, what's the implication is going to be by just looking at, U.S. will continue to be super unfriendly for a while to any Chinese company. And it may not be the best place to be in terms of growth, in terms of market expansion, or maybe not even for exit and definitely not for investment. So I think we need to be aware of that. For China to follow the U.S. way, it's going to be very, very tough. And of course, U.S. want to go with the U.S. way and China want to go the China way. But it's going to continue basically grow sort of the distrust and tension between two countries. And it's just going to discourage many Chinese companies, and in fact, not just Chinese companies, non-Chinese or even global companies to come to the U.S. because it just seems so unfriendly.
So how is this impacting your investment strategy? Is this going to be changing where you put your money? I think I learned so much every time I go back to China and think Hong Kong is still an amazing, vibrant country, city. And for us I think particular for Hong Kong entrepreneurs, really need to think global. And of course, China is already doing that. And really, I think Silicon Valley, where we primarily focus on investing, is a place which many of us are working from home, and many of us actually thinking about moving out of San Francisco. But so Silicon Valley is a spirit. We will still continue to focus on Silicon Valley, but we welcome Hong Kong entrepreneur and Chinese entrepreneur who want to go global. All right, Edith Young for us of Race Capital. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on us, your perspective, Edith, with us. I really appreciate hearing from you. As we've been talking, the House has officially passed that vote on sanctions against Chinese officials for actions taken against the Uyghur population, the Muslim minority in China. This is something that the Senate passed a couple of weeks ago. The president hasn't yet said what stance he will take on it, but this now goes to the president's desk. Meantime, we have been waiting for these two astronauts to exit the Crew Dragon. They're still working on getting the hatch open and getting those astronauts out, but we've been watching Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley sitting there as they wait to disembark and can start preparing for their next launch, scheduled now for Saturday. Coming up, after years of criticism, Twitter finally taking a harder line on tweets from President Trump. We'll tell you how next. This is Bloomberg. Astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are now exiting the Crew Dragon after their launch was scrubbed and postponed till Saturday. They will now start preparing for that. This wouldn't have been the first visit to space for either of them. They've both been astronauts for a couple of decades, but it would be their first together. And of course, a historic mission restarting the space shuttle program off U.S. soil via a private company, SpaceX. We'll be following developments throughout the week as we work towards that launch on Saturday. Meantime, I want to turn now to Twitter, finally taking a harder line stance on tweets from President Trump. In a morning tweet now, the president not seeming amused. He has threatened to strongly regulate or even shut down Twitter as a result. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, who's been covering this story. What happened here, Kurt, is that Twitter flagged a tweet posted by President Trump about mail-in ballots, and he is now not pleased. What's the latest?
No. Yeah, he's not pleased at all. And this is basically a policy. It's rather new. They just started doing this in the last couple months, where they've started identifying tweets that are misleading, not necessarily directly against the company's guidelines. And so instead of removing them entirely, they're adding these labels to try and, essentially share more information about the topic at hand. And it's an acknowledgement by the company that whatever the original tweet is, it is misleading or misinformation. And that's what they did here to President Trump's tweets. And it's the first time they've ever taken action against Trump, which is, part of the reason that this is so shocking that they would choose to do this right now, especially that we are about 5 months away from the election.
Well, speaking of misleading, can the president actually shut down Twitter?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I haven't spoken with anyone or heard anyone today that says that he would be able to shut down a private company like this. Obviously, there are other powers that the government has. We've seen some of the government agencies, the Department of Justice, the FTC, they've come out and started to investigate some of these big tech companies like Facebook and Google for antitrust reasons. Now, Twitter has never really been part of those conversations because it's not quite at the same scale as those other tech players. In theory, the government could create some headaches for Twitter, President Trump's behest. But as far as I know, Twitter is still going to be operating tomorrow and into next week.
Okay. All right, Kurt Wagner, I know you'll keep us honest. Thanks so much for that update. I do want to bring you a new headline that just rolled in, that the United States, death in the United States from the coronavirus has officially surpassed 100,000. Simply cannot believe we have gotten there after a matter of weeks. Deaths around the world now more than 350,000, and of course almost 6 million cases, and certainly still far from over. Again, coming from Johns Hopkins, deaths in the United States from COVID-19 now more than 100,000. That's it for Bloomberg Technology. Bloomberg Daybreak Australia is next.